welcome to UC Today. My name is Kieran Devlin, and today's session is an exclusive interview with Chriselle Hea, founding director at the consultancy Ethos Chain. Chriselle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Before we explore exactly some of the amazing roles you've taken up across your career, Chriselle, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey across retail, football, IT to your consultancy now?
Yes, of course. And the one thing that struck me over my career is how technology has evolved. So I actually started my career as a pharmacist. And I remember being a pharmacist in Earl's Court Boots, and we had 50 methadone patients on our books. So methadone helps heroin addicts get off the hard stuff. And in those days, I literally had a huge book, really, really thick, looked very, very old-fashioned. And every time I dispensed any methadone as liquid, I had to record down to the last mil how much I dispensed. And that big old book would get audited. Now, of course, if you think what happens in some pharmacies, not all still, but some pharmacies, you have robotic dispensing, and you would have had an electronic record of what had been dispensed all automatically. So, I mean, pharmacy is one area that has changed and is changing rapidly. So after I was a pharmacist, I decided I didn't want to work in a dispensary for the rest of my life. And that's why I joined Accenture. And I didn't really understand what Accenture was all about, to be honest, at that time. But it was a great organisation because they taught me how to code. And I'm not saying I was great at it, but it did mean that I have a really good appreciation, even today, as to how a system hangs together. But I have to say, one of the highlights for me when I was a young consultant at Accenture is that I did a project and it was looking at rights and royalties working for EMI Music. And I got flown business class to New York to meet music executives and on to LA. You can imagine how glamorous and exciting I found that at the time. And when I was in LA, I got to meet, she was actually a film director who also had responsibility for creating the music for her film. So I went to chat to her in Capitol Records, which is quite an iconic round building in LA. And I remember when I got to reception, there was a lady that took me to a room to the side of reception, and it was full of CDs. Of course, that feels ancient now, and I was able to stuff as many CDs as I possibly could into my bag. So, of course, you know, people don't think twice about using Spotify, but I also remember going to visit another music executive on that very same trip. And I actually went to his house. I remember the swimming pool in his garden. And he was actually explaining to me how music was going to be digitized. And at that time, it was like a real wow moment. But like I said, nobody thinks twice about it anymore. So then when I left Accenture, I joined Sainsbury's. And I was based in their head office in Holborn. It's still there today. And at the time, the internet shopping was really quite in its infancy. And I remember hearing about how Sainsbury's was actually struggling to make any money, and nobody really had much focus on the internet. It was almost just a little bit pioneering, and that we were just dabbling in it. But of course, I know still the majority of people do buy their groceries from a bricks and mortar store. But of course, again, I don't think we can imagine not doing internet shopping. Certainly I couldn't. Then after I was at Sainsbury's, I joined Superdrug, another retailer, and already technology had moved on to such an extent that there was some proof of concepts already around business process automation, BPA tools, and also artificial intelligence. And actually, people always think artificial intelligence is new, but actually it's been around for many, many years. And actually retailers, and even at Sainsbury's, were using types of artificial intelligence for what we now call predictive AI. So things, for example, predicting sales to get the right stock on the shelves, for example, price elasticity modeling, that's hard to say, but that was a sort of artificial intelligence because the systems had to, again, have a look at sales and look at the impact of price on sales. And that was a few years ago. And then I joined Arsenal Football Club, as I'm sure everybody knows. And again, Arsenal was a very broad role. Everybody thinks that Arsenal Football Club's just about 11 blokes kicking a football on a football pitch. And of course, predominantly it is. And that's why people are interested in Arsenal. But there's so much other things that happen in a football club, and they are all very heavily reliant on technology. We'd had a retail shop, we had an online website selling the merchandise, we had an academy, which is not based at the Emirates. We obviously had all the technology running a match day. We were a charity, and believe it or not, there was still some technology to help with the charity. And I probably haven't even listed everything, but you can imagine it was a very, very diverse technology landscape, if you like. And some of it still had to be on-prem and some of it in the cloud. And actually, we did have the opportunity at that time to work with a third party. And again, it's a few years ago now, to do a proof of concept using artificial intelligence. And it was at that time when no one really knew what AI was, because I was quite excited about it. And I remember going around to all the executives saying, we've got an opportunity to use some AI for your department. What do you think? And they were all like, we don't know what you're talking about. What's AI? So I sort of took a bit of a step back. And actually, we came up with a use case, which was, wouldn't it be great if we could predict a number of people that come to the Emirates Stadium on a match day? That's obviously quite important because a stadium employs thousands of people on a match day, from stewards to first aid people to the people in the restaurants and the bars. And so we started to think about what are the data points that influence people going to a match. Now, actually, that's actually quite complicated because there's many reasons which will influence whether you go to a match. It could be the price of tickets, it could be the day of the week, it could be the weather, there could be a transport issue, it could be the fan sentiment, depending on where the club is in the league, who they're particularly playing, did they win or lose last time? And you can imagine it's quite complicated. Some of that data is internal, some of that's external. Now, it was quite an early prototype, but what that taught me was data is really important, first of all, but also you're not necessarily going to get your model completely accurate right when you start. And in fact, the accuracy of that very first model was really quite low. And interestingly enough, the guy who'd been the stadium director for 40 years said, I can tell you with probably 99% accuracy how many people are going to attend a particular match. So I think that's just worth remembering, that it's not, even today, I don't think it can solve everything. So I guess that then takes me to what I'm doing today. So I am a founding director for a consultancy called Ethos Chain. I have quite a few business partners, and I think what's unique about us is we have all held senior positions in both the public and private sector. And that's not to sort of criticise some of other consultancies. Like I said, I started my tech career in Accenture, but we're not career consultants. And I think what that brings is a real, hands-on, real-life experience. And the other thing is we want to help businesses at fair prices, but also we want to be fair to society as a whole. And that sounds very aspirational. But if I look at some of the NED positions my business partners hold, I absolutely believe that to be true. So I guess that's where I am today. But technology has moved on hugely in the last few years.
And just as important, naturally, to being a successful tech leader is the people management. How important are compassion and emotional intelligence in managing people as an IT leader during that course of technological development? I was wondering if you had any favourite stories about this.
Well, first of all, I would always call myself a people-centric technology leader, and I've spoken about this in the past. And there's a lot of hype around new technologies, and it's not just AI, but VR, sorry, AR, BPA. There's lots going on, and I think sometimes the narrative is too much focused on the technology, and what people are forgetting that people are still at the heart of the successful implementation of that technology. And you still need people to understand what your business problems are, understand what the right technology is, and be involved in testing a new solution. And so actually focusing on your people, I would say, is almost more important today than ever before. Do I have any stories? I can give you one story when I think I inherited a team member that was never at his desk, and that was obviously pre-pandemic. And this had been going on for years. I had found out by talking to HR that basically he just would go off sick, come back, and then go off sick again. And the issue was that it wasn't just impacting sort of, I think, my team, because they were like, somebody actually said to me, we don't know why he has a chair. We don't know why he has a desk. But I think was also reflecting badly on me as a leader if I didn't deal with the situation. And I think throughout my career, I think that's what some companies really struggle with. And I'm a firm believer, if you really want a happy, productive team, you do have to deal with the poor behaviours or the poor performance. That's my personal view.
And I guess zeroing in on your past roles in retail, I'm always very fascinated about the challenges that emerge from particularly busy retail seasons or during massive sales, and such as Black Friday or the Boxing Day sales, around the challenges both IT scalability, what it's like to manage the tech during such a busy time, and also the people management of the people who will be looking after the technology. Because I can imagine it can be quite stressful to overseeing such a busy time.
Well, I'm going to start off with your sort of latter part of the question, which is the people that, again, going back to the people involved in supporting these systems. You are quite right. And I think, again, IT support, or you might want to call it something fancier, but at the end of the day, the people at the sharp end making sure these systems are up and running sometimes don't get the credit that they deserve. So you're quite right. And it can be quite a stressful time if something to go wrong because there's big stakes at risk, especially if you're a retailer relying on that revenue. But the key thing, I think, we talked about the evolution of technology, but the key thing is about cloud. So in the old days, when you had like your own servers on premise, you were having to buy a lot of compute power to sort of cope with these peaks, but maybe the rest of the year they were idle. And that's the beauty of cloud. You can actually consume the power or the compute power when you actually need it. So I think, yeah, that's something that has hugely helped organisations that are very peaky, for want of a better word.
And you meant with your Arsenal time, I was wondering, were you there during the pandemic, and what sort of challenges did you face in adapting to the pandemic and the rise of things like hybrid and remote work?
Well, yes, I was. I was at Arsenal during the pandemic, and actually, I think yes, going back to the IT support point we were just discussing, you still needed to have the people in place to make sure we could still run matches, even though there weren't anybody in the stadium. So yes, that was a given. The technology still had to work. But I suspect the challenges I had were like any other company. And for me, it was about collaboration and how do you work when, like you said, well, hybrid, at some point, you're all purely remote. Now, ironically, and I have spoken to lots of IT leads about this, and some of us were sort of quite lucky and some were a bit unlucky, but I guess I was lucky in that I was quite familiar with what teams could do for Arsenal just generally, and I had started to roll it out before the pandemic, and thank goodness I did. But what's interesting is when I started to roll it out, we've forgotten this now, but if you were just relying on face-to-face contact and emails, it was actually quite a radical way of working and sharing your files and doing video calls, etc. I think people have forgotten. And I remember the first time I went to talk to the exec, and I also had a boardroom at the Emirates Stadium, and I was in the boardroom saying, I've got some really exciting technology. This is going to radically change the way we worked for the better. And after I'd finished my presentation, I remember walking out, and then one of the senior execs turned around and said to me, just to let everyone know, just so you know, I'm never using chat. Now, I'm sure that person will probably eat their words now. But the point what I think the pandemic has done is I think IT leaders have gone from having a situation where people were resistant to new technology to during the pandemic when they were literally screaming for some technical solution. So in a way, I think there's definitely been a shift, and I think the IT leadership role is actually becoming a lot more important in companies than it ever was. I mean, I still think some statistics saying there's a lot of CIOs that still aren't on the board, and I personally find that incredible because so much of a company is reliant on its technology. Yeah.
And one final question before I let you go, Christelle, and this is touching on what you mentioned at the start about why you started Ethos Chain and why it distinguishes itself from a lot of the other consultancies out there. But I just think, what are you enjoying about the shift in career into consultancy? What was it that, if you could please give us more detail, and what was the origin of your decision to move into consultancy?
Well, the first thing, remember, I had been a consultant earlier on in my career. So although I then spent the latter part of my career working in line roles, I do have a very good understanding of what consultancy is like. I guess I just feel I'm at that stage in my career and I've experienced so much like evolution of technology, as we've been talking about, working in different industries, that I've got a lot to offer other companies. And basically, I'm working with a great group of like-minded founding directors, and we all want to make a difference. And I thought, wow, that's great. And I guess the other thing, which has nothing to do with technology, but I got a flavour for being a bit more entrepreneurial because I've had to manage some of my dad's business affairs as he's getting older, and his health isn't great, and a completely different industry. But I'm quite attracted by the idea of doing something for myself, and I guess it's more for myself, if you like, because it's almost like it's part of my business now, and I sort of enjoy that entrepreneurial aspect.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today, but I've really enjoyed today's session. It's been really fascinating. So thank you, Christelle, for being here.
Thank you very much.
And if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share on social media, and we'll see you next time. I've been Kieran Devlin of UC Today. Thanks for watching.